Welcome to Continuing Conversations, a podcast presented by VCU Continuing and Professional Education. My name is Connor Lobb, and on this show, I'll be interviewing different leaders in the field of continuing education. This week, my guest is Tim Luckritz Marquis, an instructional design lead for curriculum development for VCU Online. We'll be talking about the benefits of applying instructional design to online learning, instructional design theory, and online education. I hope you enjoy the episode. Okay, welcome to the Continuing Conversations podcast. This is the first episode of 2022, and I am very excited to welcome Tim Luckritz Marquis onto the show. Tim is an instructional design lead with curriculum development for VCU Online. Happy to have Tim on the show. We're coworkers, colleagues at the big VCU family umbrella,
Sure.
And I'm pumped to have him on the show. Thank you for hopping on this with me, Tim.
Thanks, Connor. Looking forward to talking with you.
So first up, get a little background on you. So do you want to tell us about your educational background and how you came into your current position as an instructional designer, or rather an instructional design lead, which is very cool.
Yeah, sure. A lot of people come to instructional design from a lot of different directions, especially these days. And my path came through being just a higher ed faculty member. I got a PhD in religious studies, and it was really excited to become a professor and teach. And around the time I got my degree, I was sort of adjuncting at a big state school in North Carolina, one of the UNC schools. So school, not too different from VCU in that it's a big public institution. And then I had a tenure track job at a small college, actually a seminary at a small college in Pennsylvania. Oh, cool. And that gave me some, it gave me some space to have sort of a secure job to sort of explore other things in the academy. And one of those things was the school had a big push to increase the use of educational technology and even start teaching online a little bit. And I took on a big role doing that. I think one of the reasons I got interested in that was I started really thinking about how my students were learning outside of the classroom. For me, writing was a big part of all the courses I taught. And I noticed that my students talked to each other all the time about everything. It was really, really wonderful sense of community. They talked to each other about what was going on in their lives, their families, their kids, their illnesses, their successes. And so I'd say to them eventually, are you all talking about your papers that you're writing for my class? And they said, no. I said, wait a second, I think this is one of the most important parts of the class. And yet they only ever do it by themselves, submit the papers to me, get comments back. And it ends up being this weird letter, 5-page, 10-page, 15-page letter that they just send to me and get comments back. And so I said, this has to happen in the classroom. And if that means that some of the lecturing that I'm doing in class needs to not happen or happen in a different way, then so be it. And this was around 2013 when you started to see in higher education a lot of talk about what they call a flipped classroom or an inverted classroom, which was about getting the types of things like lectures that normally were happening in the face-to-face classroom. So maybe recording them and having the students watch them outside of the class so that the more active and communal aspects of learning could happen when you have that precious face-to-face time. But part of that meant that I wasn't sort of downgrading what they were doing outside of the class. It meant that I wanted to make sure that it was more structured and that they had an environment where I could help them learn outside of the classroom in the same way that I was in the classroom. So I got very interested in how I was using the LMS, how I was using Canvas, how I was using video lectures, how I was using discussions, how I was using collaboration on things like Google Docs. When you have, in every school that I know of, every credit hour for a class means that you have 1 hour in class and 2 hours of work outside of class. So what you do in class is very important, but the students are actually learning twice as much or spending twice as much time learning outside the classroom as inside the classroom. And so that was really what got me interested in how do you structure learning in ways that don't involve the physical classroom. And of course, online learning is the ultimate example of that. So that was something I got more and more interested in. And then ended up moving to Richmond, Virginia, which I love. Been here for 9 years, and so was lucky enough to get a job almost 4 years ago here with VCU Online. And so that's what I do all the time. I work with faculty to think about how does learning happen outside of the physical classroom? How do we access students where they are in the world, and things like that. So it's a really, really great job and a really great team of people.
So your experience as a professor really um, is shaping what you're doing here. And it sounds like even more so than like wanting to teach students, you want to help professors access that sort of ability to like broaden the communal time, or not maybe like broaden the communal time, but just like make that more valuable for students and less tone down on lectures and do more interactive learning.
For sure, yeah. It's and so a big thing, the big thing we always have in mind as instructional designers is the student experience. We're always, we're sort of designing courses and building courses, but then the final goal is to make sure that it's going to be a positive, successful experience for students. So we're always thinking about how we impact students. But yeah, directly we're working with faculty. I love working with faculty. I love all the different expertise that people bring to the table. I work with people all over the university
Mm.
with all sorts of different approaches to teaching, and they're all, they all have their own ways of succeeding at teaching, and it's amazing to work with them and help them bring those methods online. But yeah, to sort of say, their lecturing can have a place, and you can have a very engaging lecture, but that might be a little harder to do online. And so we want to take advantage of the things that you do have a good opportunity to do online, which is to give students feedback, to hear from all of your students, to give them a little bit of time to think about things in a way that they might not have if they're sort of just instantly raising their hand in the classroom. And yeah, when you said about active, interactive learning, that's super important for teaching online, both just for accreditation, but also just to be pedagogically successful, to make sure that students are engaged in their learning, that they're demonstrating what they've learned, that they're showing how they're growing, and that they're growing with each other in a way that's guided by the professor, by the instructor. So yeah, that's one of the first things we talk about with online learning is that it has to be active learning.
So what does it look like? I mean, just like, well, I guess an important question for people is what exactly is instructional design? I think I have an idea, and people might have an idea if they've ever taken like any kind of course. But what does it look like from your, like, from the back end? What is instructional design from that perspective?
Absolutely. So instructional design is just the considered and planned design, development, and delivery of learning experiences. It's come from a lot of different backgrounds. It really happens in any organization that's trying to design learning. So there are, if you were to look for instructional design jobs, you would see basically two types of them. One would be instructional designers that work for corporations and things like that, who design trainings for employees and things like that, or for certain skills. And then there's educational instructional designers who work all throughout, from K through 12 up through university levels, like we do, to sort of design, so sort of conceptualize in a very planned way, develop in which means building with the technology tools that you have, and then delivering, which means talking about how are these experiences taught, how are they facilitated by instructors. And we have a little bit to play in all of those roles. Instructional design doesn't have to be online, but I think the rise of instructional design has a lot to do with the rise of online learning. And I think most instructional designers, probably all instructional designers, would say the first thing you need to know is what are the goals of teaching? What are the goals of the course? We try to be very clear about what the goals are, and then we try to work backwards from those and always keep an eye on what the goals and objectives are. At VCU Online, we roughly follow a method called backward design. It's sometimes called design for learning, where we're starting with the objectives, and we're sort of moving backwards through major assignments, assessments, down to content. And so yeah, it's when we say the considered design, we have methods to use, we have ideas about best practices, while always keeping in mind the specific context of the field or the program or the student audience.
So what is the difference between, and maybe they're the same thing and I'm just not aware, but like I've had friends who were like high school teachers, and you hear things like I was setting up my lesson plan for the year. I was like preparing my plans for my students for the year. Is that also instructional design, or is what you're talking about a little bit different, maybe like a broader scope of things rather than preparing for a specific course?
I think there's a lot of overlap between those two things, and so they get called a lot of different things. And so, lesson plans or curriculum design, I think there's some overlap between that. I think our design is largely, not exclusively, for what we call asynchronous courses, which means that the students and an instructor are not together at the same time, or certainly in the same place. So they're not teaching in a face-to-face classroom, but they're also primarily not or not at all meeting over Zoom or video conferencing, so that everything is happening asynchronously, that the learning experiences are somewhat self-paced, but they're still they're interacting enough that they're going through the experiences together. And so in that sense, it's not lesson plans per se, unless there are some synchronous sessions. And then we talk about, okay, how do you plan for objectives for those lessons? And so yeah, there is some overlap, but I think there's some slight differences in a higher education environment.
So if I was a professor who, with the new sort of like online boom that we're having like across the country and at VCU, with like more demand for online learning, a lot more asynchronous classes. Like myself, I'm in an asynchronous grad program at VCU. If I was a professor who was encountering this at VCU, what might I like really gain, and what's like a great benefit of coming to your team and saying, I need some help with like my instructional design so I can serve my students the best way possible. I'm used to doing teaching in this way. Now everything is like new and different and scary. Please help me, Tim.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a huge overlap between what we do and what we call faculty development. We're here to speak to faculty and help them achieve their goals for their students and help enhance who they are as instructors, as teachers, as educators. And so when I first meet a faculty member, I want to know what their goals are. I want to know what gets them excited about the course, and I want to get to know what gets them excited about teaching. I want to get to know how they teach, how they see their teaching as most successful, and how that would work in the online environment. I want to know about their students. I want to know what they expect from the however many number of students, whether it's 10, whether it's 100, whether it's 50 every semester. What are the students going to take to very quickly? What will they find challenging? What are they going to find exciting? What are they going to find a little bit of a slog, and how do we help them through that? So I want to learn about their context and about their what makes them excited about teaching. A big question that we use on the curriculum design team, and this comes from our assistant director, is how do you want your students to be different at the end of the course? That's a big one, because that's going to be kind of our guiding light throughout the development process. What do you want them to know? What do you want them to be able to do? And what are the ways of being? What are the patterns that you want them to have? So, I want them to know the periodic table of the elements, and I want them to appreciate what it means to be an ethical scientist. And those are equal goals, and so then it becomes, okay, from there, how do they show you that they can do those things? What are the experiences they can have to learn those things and then finally demonstrate that learning? So we're, like I talked about backwards design, but backwards design begins with what are your goals? Who are your students? Who are you? What's your field look like? How do we make asynchronous online learning work within that context?
So you're really kind of one of the big, sounds like, purposes of your team is to meet faculty where they're at, and then have them help them enhance what they're what they are already doing, but just adjust it and make it work specifically for this like format we've been talking about, which is the asynchronous online learning, which is, it's a relatively new thing at VCU. Maybe that's not exactly true, but it's like, it certainly feels that way. So that's really interesting. So like, what do you wish that people knew about online learning that they don't right now? Like, do you feel like there's a gap between the perception of what online learning is and what it sort of like, or rather like, what is like what people think online learning is? What is it really, and what do you wish it could be?
I think if you haven't experienced it as a student or done it as a instructor, it's very difficult to imagine what an asynchronous course looks like. And we encounter that all the time. And I think it's perfectly normal for people who are so used to classroom teaching. When a faculty member says, I got to go teach, you know exactly what they're going to go do. They're going to go into a classroom and they're going to talk with the students. Um, and so what does that look like when you don't have to go teach, when there's no one place or one time where you have to be? And I think when we talk to faculty, we get them to think about all the other amazing things they do as instructors and how they're going to rely on those aspects of teaching in the asynchronous environment. So when a student submits something, some piece of work, and you give them feedback on it, that part of it is a much bigger part of asynchronous teaching. And so part of it is managing how that time works. How much time are you going to spend giving feedback, and keeping in mind that, in a 3-credit course, you're usually going to teach in that way for 3 hours. And instead of doing that, you're going to be interacting with students either in small groups or individually for that 3 hours and a little more, all the time that you would normally spend lecturing or conducting a seminar. You can now, you don't get that time to interact with them synchronously, but you do get that time back in a more deliberate way, and in some ways in a more individualized way, in the way that you give students feedback, in the way that you dialogue with them through feedback on assignments, through a discussion board. You, of course, can use whatever other tools that you need to use to talk to students individually. Zoom, talk to them on the cell phone, grab coffee in your office or something like that, individual, things like that. But it really enhances the way in which you have dialogues with students around assignments, around projects, around papers, around whatever they're doing. And that's part of where the active learning comes in, is the students do things and then you're sort of guiding them through it. You're giving them feedback and things like that. And so I think that pattern of interaction, which is not completely foreign to faculty, but just gets enhanced in the asynchronous environment, becomes very important. That doesn't mean lecturing is gone from the asynchronous environment. It doesn't mean dialogue or discussion is gone from the asynchronous environment, but that it just works a little bit differently because of the asynchronous environment. And so we're always trying to think of ways to enhance what they're already, to take what they're already doing, what their strengths are in the classroom, and translate them as well as we can to the asynchronous class. But I think that's a big part of it, is that it is actually more about more dialogue with students than less. It's just not happening in the moment and face to face, which has pluses and minuses.
Right. I mean, so as a former professor, what, like, is the role of like supporting students in doing their work more important in a way than not like than teaching them, but like sort of, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like I have not been in a traditional classroom in a long time. And I always found it, I always found my most fruitful experiences with teachers and professors where it was not necessarily in the classroom when I'm like receiving a lecture or asking questions about like the lesson plan of what's happening. It's like when I go to office hours or whatever and talk to them in my paper and have like a really great interaction and walk away feeling like I've been like listened to and my concerns about something have been addressed or whatever. So maybe this isn't as much of a question as just sort of like a topic to talk about in terms of like instructional design and how you approach, helping faculty achieve those kind of interactions in a learning space where there isn't even the opportunity to have like a regular sort of classroom interaction because everything is like disembodied and over the computer now.
Sure. Yeah, I think, I mean, maybe part of what you're getting at is does this emphasize interaction and active learning over you said sort of teaching them. And that's kind of what I was saying is that, when we think of teaching, we do think of lecturing. We think of, I'm going to tell you something you don't know and you're going to listen. Right. And and now you're going to have that information, and it's, there was some people will know this name, but there was a Brazilian educational theorist and educator in the 60s named Paulo Freire. And he called this the banking model of education, which I have something and I'm going to give it to you. And I'm the treasury of knowledge and I just need to transfer it to you. And what he argued for was more learning as a partnership. And I think you see that a lot more over the last couple of decades. I think some of the faculty will be familiar with the phrase, instead of being the sage on the stage, you should be the guide on the side. That sort of thing. And people are talking about that in face-to-face education anyway. I think that does get enhanced in online education. That doesn't mean there isn't a place for lecturing. Students do need to hear basic comments and they just concepts, and they just need them explained to them. They need to read things. They need to hear things. They, videos, and we work very closely in most of our courses with our media team, our instructional media team, which I think a lot of people at VCU know because their work is so amazing and really impresses people. Yeah, and so we work with them all the time to produce videos that are essentially, in most cases, very short lectures that get across very discrete concepts or skills to students in a way that's digestible in the online format. And so one of the things that people who work with us might know, because we say it all the time, is that those videos need to be very short. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is people who are engaged in learning science really believe that people can only really pay attention to videos that are only like 5 minutes long, 12 minutes long. Studies say different things, but we're always going for under 10 minutes. And some faculty say, well, I'm used to lecturing for an hour. How can I do it in under 10 minutes? And I'll talk about learning science, but I also talk about, people who want to lecture for an hour, they say to me, well, but I'm a very engaging lecturer. I look at them and I see what their faces are doing. I can see when people are interested, or I can see when they're confused, or I can ask them, I can pause and I can ask them questions. And if you have an hour-long lecture that's recorded, you can't do that in the online environment. Those check-ins are like little activities where you say, did you get it? And they need a chance to tell you whether they got it or what needs clarification. And so we have to build that into the course. And so it really does accentuate the things that they're already doing, but maybe not thinking about as much. In some cases they are. Some people have very well-structured lectures and they know where they want to ask questions, and they know where they want to stop talking and say, okay, let's do an activity and things like that. But this allows us to be very deliberate about it. And I think that if you do that in the online environment, even when you go back to the face-to-face environment, it might give you a different way to be more deliberate about the ways in which you are doing that in the first place. So I think that's part of what's happening in the move to online. Is lecturing, getting basic concepts across to students is still very important. It just happens differently, and we want to make sure that we are deliberate about the engagement with students because you need to be in the online environment, but it has some advantages because you have to be deliberate. So you are deliberate about it, and you're making sure that the students have a chance to let you know what they need and give you a chance to give them what they need.
So what is the biggest benefit to you of having a course that has been that has had instructional design applied to it?
I think what I've heard from faculty is, first of all, just aside from any of the expertise we bring to it or best practices, is that they love having another set of eyes as they design the course. And that's faculty collaborate with each other. They'll ask, what do you think about this as an assignment? Have you found a good textbook? What's a good reading for this? But to spend 14 weeks with another two other instructional designers, because that's what we do in our process, or to be able to take a training course with an instructional designer who's able to look at some of what you're planning to do in your course and give another set of eyes, they really appreciate that. And then also because so many faculty at VCU have not had the opportunity to teach online, to have us there to give best practices and say, what are the ways in which you've done this assignment face to face, and say, I really think that this is going to work well online and achieve the goals that you want out of it. So that if you do it one way face-to-face and get those goals, I think in order to get the same goals in an asynchronous course, we do it, a slightly different way. It helps them be very explicit about what those goals are. That's what as I said, we do that right away, look at goals and objectives, and then always keep those in mind, making sure that everything we're doing is designed to meet those goals, is aligned with those goals. And so just to have a structured way of thinking about that. And then, like I said, just being able to talk about best practices online, because we do have, we haven't had as much online teaching at VCU to sort of have people to help introduce them to that, I think is really helpful.
So the instructional design team is a bank of knowledge, to talk about your sort of earlier pedagogical thing you were speaking about. And another set of eyes is always helpful in everything, everywhere. So that's cool. So last thing I kind of want to bring up is there's been a new blog launched, which is on our social media pages. It is called the ID Ideas blog. It's the Instructional Designer Ideas blog. Could you tell me a little bit about what the rationale behind beginning that was, and what you hope it'll achieve for the people who read it?
Sure. I think we wanted to let the VCU community know a little bit about what we do as instructional designers. We mainly do a couple of different things. I might just say something about the two teams at VCU Online. We have two teams of instructional designers. The one I'm on is the curriculum development team, which is tasked with designing courses for programs, majors, degrees that are going to be fully online. So we work with programs and degrees, and we're also doing gen eds in the college. Is the two main things that we do, and designing full courses with faculty members who are designing courses for those programs or for the gen eds. And then we have another team called the professional development team, which has training courses for faculty who want to learn how to teach online, and also curate and create a number of other resources, training, self-paced training courses, experiences, curate a bunch of resources. I'll say, almost 4 years ago when I first got hired, we had 5 instructional designers, and the 5 of us kind of built the first training course. And I haven't really been involved in the training courses for about 2 years, and it is amazing the amount of resources they have. So if they're interested in learning more about teaching online, or taking a training course, or learning about certain topics, they should really go to the Alt Lab website and see what professional development opportunities there are. Because that's really helpful, because as we keep saying, to be able to, imagine what online learning looks like, and to see what some best practices and resources are, is really helpful. I think that's part of why we started the blog, was to try to get the word out about what we do and what instructional design is and what online learning is. And so we're trying to, and also in some ways show that what online learning is, not just at VCU, but across the country and across the world. And so some of our blog posts are going to be sort of talking about how what we do relates to research in instructional design, because it's an academic field. It is, we conduct research and write in instructional design. And so we want to show that what we're doing fits into a discipline that has, that looks for evidence, that is a part of the scholarship of teaching and learning. But do it in a way that is a blog post that says, here's what some recent studies are saying, and here's how that informs what we do. Here's some of our best practices, and the comment section is open. Feel free to share what you're doing that's similar, some ideas that you have, or if you have any questions. And so it's about to get word out about us, but also to show what it means to design a course online, and also share some best practices in a very quick way.
Yeah, and we those blog posts are published every Wednesday on the VCU Alt Lab Facebook page and the Twitter page. So please check those out if you're a faculty member who wants to gain some of this knowledge that Tim is talking about. And again, if you are in need of some instructional design support, we have a team. We have the technology to help you do this.
Right. The $6 million course. Probably not $6 million, but lots of expertise.
Yeah, lots of expertise. $6 million worth of expertise.
There you go.
Well, yeah. Is there anything that you like want to add in terms of like what you wish people knew about online learning? What's the real benefits of instructional design being applied to your course before we end the episode?
I think I would just say that online learning is just going to enhance your experience as a teacher. I talk to so many faculty who love teaching and love their students and want to get to know them a little better and be able to help them more. And I think even if I think there will be a lot of faculty, more and more faculty who are teaching online and face-to-face and hybrid and all the other modalities, and they'll be doing it at the same time. And I think even if teaching online is not your favorite thing, and we will have some faculty who say, oh my gosh, I love teaching online and that's how I want to do it, but we're going to have people who are still going to want to have that wonderful experience of being in the classroom and being with the students. It's going to give you tools that enhance your teaching regardless of the modality that you're going to, and some of those tools are going to make it so that all of your students have better access to what you're trying to teach. When we think about access in online learning, we sometimes think about trying to fit it into people's schedules or fit it into where people live or fit it into their lives. And that's certainly true and part of what we're trying to do. But it also gives students increased cognitive access to the ideas that you're teaching. And so if you're teaching 50 students in a classroom and 12 people are really involved in the conversation, that's a really great conversation for a 50-person classroom. And yet there's still 42 students that you didn't hear from. In the way that if you do a discussion board, or if you're giving increased feedback on assignment for 50 students, or even if it's just in small groups, or you're able to, have a way in which every student can have a voice and maybe take the time to consider their answer if they're not comfortable answering really quickly in an hour-long class. Those are all different strategies you now have to give your students access to active learning and the concepts you're trying to give them. So I think working with us, working with your colleagues in terms of thinking about how does teaching and learning work in these different modalities is going to enhance your ability as a teacher in all of the modalities. And I think that's a great experience, and is kind of the goal we have as teachers, is to make sure that our students have more access to learning.
That was poetic. That was beautiful. Seriously, yeah. I mean, it's all more access, more learning, more people get to get what they need out of the class. So I think that's awesome. Well, yeah. Thanks a lot for coming on, Tim. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Connor. I really appreciate it. This has been great.
Yeah. Well, that'll do us for today, and thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for listening to that episode. I had a great time talking to Tim, and if you want to learn more about working with Tim and the instructional design team, visit altlab.vcu.edu. I hope you have a great day, and thanks again for listening.